Why are only 54% of construction and manufacturing businesses self-funded compared to 80% of all healthcare businesses? What do healthcare businesses know that others don't? That's the question that we're here to answer today. Hi, I'm Rich Westermeyer with Benesmart. Welcome, and please join me as I dive into group health plan purchasing strategies as well as risk financing strategies. Whether you're an HR professional, an executive, or a business owner, it's crucial to understand the nuances of how you finance your group health plan. With the cost of healthcare outpacing inflation, it's important that employers are able to identify ways to creatively mitigate their risk while still achieving the primary goal of providing rich benefits to your employees. Today, we'll explore the similarities and differences between 5 different risk financing strategies. These are fully insured, level funded, carrier level funded, captives, and self-funded plans. These strategies may sound complex, but they all boil down to one goal: mitigating risk effectively while delivering healthcare to your employees. Ready to understand your options? Stay with us as we unpack this topic. In the next 10 minutes, I'll break down these models, comparing how they handle networks, third-party administrators, pharmacy benefit managers, and insurance. We'll also talk about customization, carve-out options, and risk transfer mechanisms. By the end, you'll have clarity to make informed decisions about your company's health plan strategy. So as I mentioned, we're going to cover the 5 health plans you should know about and what you need to know about them. All right, let's dive into it, and let's start with some common ground. First things first, all financing strategies share some common elements. So whether you're talking about a fully insured plan or a self-funded plan, you're typically going to see these as your 4 primary components. This is your third-party administrator, your network, your pharmacy benefit manager, and then your insurance component. And what we're really going to focus on today is this insurance component, as we talked about earlier, the risk transfer mechanism. Now, we all know networks connect your employees to healthcare providers, TPAs administer your plan on your behalf, the PBMs manage your prescription drug benefits, and finally, the component that we want to focus on today, the insurance layer, determines how your risk is shared or transferred. These components all work together, but in each strategy, their roles can be a little bit different. So let's keep it moving here, and let's go into the first health plan purchasing strategy that we want to look at. The components of a fully insured health plan. As you can see, we have the same 4 components. We have our third-party administrator, our network, our pharmacy benefit manager, check, check, check. And then finally, we have our insurance component, which in a fully insured plan is going to be a risk pool. And so your group would be subject to a pooling point in terms of how you transfer risk. And we'll cover that more in just a second. But the one thing that I also want to point out about the components of this fully insured health plan, as you can see, they're the same components we just looked at earlier, but you'll see that all 4 components of the fully insured health plan are owned by the same entity. So in a supply chain, that's what we call vertical integration. Now, let's talk a little bit about the risk pool or the pooling points, and I want to explain how pooling points in a fully insured plan actually work. So the pooling point is a limit. Think of it like a money limit. If one person's medical bills go over this limit, the extra costs above that limit don't count against the company's insurance costs because they're shared by the pool. So once you hit that pooling point, then the pool kicks in and covers your losses. So why is this important? Well, imagine if one employee on your health plan gets really sick and has $200,000 worth of medical bills. Without a pooling point, those costs could bankrupt your health plan. In this instance, they're not going to. So the pooling point is your risk transfer mechanism in a fully insured plan. So again, with a pooling point, it's like a safety net. Talking a little bit more about fully insured, especially the supply chain. What we see here is we have our fully insured health plan supply chain. So we're going to look at those 4 components that we looked at. They're part of the health plan: TPA, network, pharmacy benefit manager, and insurance. In this instance, they're all owned by the insurer, whether that's UHC, Cigna, Aetna. Those are all profitable operating entities owned by the insurer. So they own all those entities that produce your insurance card, and then you pay them your premiums in the fully insured arrangement. So what we see there is we see vertical integration in the supply chain. So just to talk about this and make it a little more real here, this is a kind of a messy flow chart, but we see the threat posed by vertical integration, because when you have these larger insurers like Cigna owning and operating large PBMs, or vice versa, when you have a PBM owning and operating an insurer, some of the lines get a little crossed there, and the company's not really working in your best interest anymore, managing your prescription to the best that it can for your plan spend. So ultimately, what we're suggesting here is that some companies are looking at options where they can move out of a vertically integrated supply chain in order to recapture some of those lost premium dollars that have just simply become profits of these large corporate conglomerates that own multiple entities to drive profits within your health plan. So that would be the suggestion of moving away from a fully insured health plan. Next up, we're going to look at the components of a carrier level funded health plan. So as we recall, 4 main components, check, 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 all still there. We got our third party administration, our network, our pharmacy benefit manager, but our insurance, or our risk transfer mechanism in this instance, is now a new component. So prior it was a pool, or a risk pool with a pooling point. In this instance, it becomes stop loss insurance. So this is like, I liken this to having your own pool essentially, and that's the picture you see there. So at this point, your group then is individually underwritten, and your claims are now going to be paid out of your own premiums. And if you have an instance where there's not enough in your claims fund to pay the claims, then the stop loss insurance kicks in and pays those catastrophic claims. So in this same health plan, we'll see also, just to point out, that in a carrier level funded health plan, similar to the fully insured, all 4 components are owned by the same entity, the carrier. Now the big advantage to being carrier level funded, we'll see here, is that in a level funded plan, a company gets to pay a set amount of premiums every month to cover the cost of health care, and then the amount is dispersed to cover claims, to cover fees for administration, and to cover the cost of stop loss insurance. So very similar to how a fully insured plan works, but the big advantage for a business in this situation is that this plan can be individually underwritten to the population of the single employer. So why it's important, guys: stop loss insurance protects the company by limiting how much they have to pay for medical claims, just like the pooling point does, only you don't know what your pooling point is in a fully insured plan. So in this instance, stop loss insurance is the risk transfer mechanism that fully absorbs you from having any additional risk in your health plan. All right. Also, looking at the supply chain once more for a carrier level funded plan, we'll see that we have the same old vertical integration going on there. The same 4 components owned by the same insurance carrier, limiting your ability to recapture some of those premium dollars that have been lost due to carrier profits. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we move into kind of the third stage of managing your health plan expense, and this is when you start to evaluate non-carrier level funded options. So maybe you've seen the writing on the wall, and that year after year with a carrier you get a less great renewal, whether it's 8%, 7%, 9%, or double digits year after year. At some point you have to choose whether or not that's going to be sustainable into the future. And one of the ways that employers today are combating that is by moving out of that vertically integrated supply chain. So you'll see the big difference here in this quote unquote supply chain is that all 4 components are independently owned and operated. Okay, so this becomes a big advantage to your company. You'll see we still have the 4 main components that we need to operate our health plan successfully: third-party administration, network, pharmacy benefit manager, and also stop-loss insurance. I think the pool just looks a little nicer in this version because we've been able to customize this plan. Now let's talk a little bit about about non-carrier level funded and how it works. So very similar to what we just saw in a non-carrier level funded plan. The big difference is that you're given the ability to unbundle, so to speak, or you have the ability to unbundle, which means that employers can pick different companies for each part. For example, the TPA that's processing your claims doesn't have to be processing claims in their own network. The PBM that is helping manage your prescription drug costs does not have to be owned and operated by the TPA in this instance. So this frees up opportunities to do things like carve out your PBM or carve out a network or come up with a regional network. And it really allows you to get creative. There's many additional strategies you can take when you move into the non-carrier level funded plan, and really your flexibility to customize your plan just greatly improves once you get to this stage of plan management. So it helps the company in a lot of ways, but you're going to have more choices. You can choose the best vendors for each part of your plan, so your company gets the best service or price. More power to negotiate would be another one that I would add on to that. Cost control. So you can negotiate costs separately with each vendor. You want to make sure that you're getting the right contracts in place, and this could be very helpful because if for whatever reason one of your vendors doesn't perform well, you have the flexibility, if they're not working, to remove them from the plan without doing a complete overhaul or quote unquote changing carriers. So again, in a non-carrier level funded plan works very similar to a level funded plan. Stop loss insurance is the risk transfer mechanism. Now, big difference here is what we'll see is that this supply chain is now disrupted. So no longer do we have vertically integrated vendors in the supply chain. We have independent vendors integrated into your supply chain. So this is a huge advantage to you at this point, because now you can pick and choose which vendors are going to best support your company's needs. All right, and now we get to strategy 4, the components of a health plan for a captive. So what we'll see here, again, just to point out, we have independently owned components that all operate together. So this is big for our company in ensuring that we get the right vendors in place and that we have the ability to control some of the costs, whether it be from surgical procedures, high-cost drugs, labs, imaging, some of the things that just eat away at our claims, right? So in this, we can see that we have, not only do we have our third-party administrator, our network, our pharmacy benefit manager, our risk transfer mechanism, but we actually have a new component as well, which is here, the captive pool. So we'll see we still have the same stop loss component, but now we entered a captive pool, and we want to talk about that a little bit. So let's take a look here at how it works. So what is a captive? First and foremost, a captive is really just a special type of self-insurance where a group of companies come together to form their own insurance pool. And that's why sometimes you'll hear the term captive pool. Each company puts money into the pool to cover medical claims for their employees. So the captive pool really operates as a second layer of risk transfer. So for like-minded companies that are all working to control their health plan expenses, they band together and they put a certain small contribution into this captive pool. And then for any reason, if your company or one of the other companies in the captive has a bad year, some of that loss can be absorbed out of the captive pool. So this does two things. Number one, it helps you spread and share your risk, so you're not effectively on the hook for any catastrophic event because you have the captive pool coverage. But number two, and importantly, it helps you buy down the cost of your stop loss premiums, because you can take a certain tranche of that risk that you were essentially transferring to the stop loss company. You no longer have to transfer that risk to the stop loss company because a tranche of that risk can be transferred to the captive pool. So this again buys down the cost of your stop loss insurance. Not to mention that just being in a captive pool alone and buying stop loss insurance in a group setting like that can also give you the added advantage of purchasing power. So there's a lot of different reasons to join a captive, but for smaller and medium-sized companies, self-funding alone can feel super risky, and a few big claims could really sideline your health plan. So rather than going at it alone, companies that are looking to make the smart money play are going to look to captives to help shift some of that risk to a group of employers. Another thing, as I mentioned earlier, but by joining a captive, companies share the risk of high cost claims across the whole group, making it safer for each company. And then finally, expanding your stop loss purchasing power. So in the captive, not only do you have the stop loss insurance as your primary risk transfer mechanism, but you also have the captive pool to transfer a layer of risk to. So we take one more look at the captive health plan supply chain. We can see we have our 4 primary components, all independent vendors integrated into your supply chain. So super important that it's not a vertically integrated supply chain. And then you tack on the captive pool for an extra layer of risk protection or risk transfer. Bring it all together with the captive plan manager, and that is how you successfully mitigate your risk in a group benefit captive. And the last component we're going to touch on here is just being self-funded. So as we can see, self-funding, simply explained, you have a third-party administrator, a network, a pharmacy benefit manager, and stop-loss insurance, all independently owned components that operate together. This is the best way to do it. In doing so, you can see you still have the same components that you first had when you were on a fully insured health plan. So the way your employees access healthcare doesn't necessarily have to change. It's all about the risk financing strategies in the background and how far you're willing to go to control this expense for your employees. So if we just take a quick peek at how does self-funded work. In a self-funded plan, the employer pays for employee medical costs directly instead of paying premiums to an insurance company. So you set aside money to cover claims, administrative costs, and stop-loss insurance. In a lot of self-funded plans, there's going to be a network as well. So you have the added advantage of having network contracted claims. But how is risk transferred in a self-funded plan? Well, self-funding simply means that the employer takes on the responsibility for paying claims. So to be truly self-funded, the employer would pay 100% of the claims, but most employers that are self-funded are still transferring risk to a stop-loss partner. So the employer takes on smaller, more predictable claims because they're easier to plan for. Stop-loss insurance takes on the unpredictable or catastrophic claims that could otherwise sideline the health plan. So again, in this plan, stop-loss insurance is the risk transfer mechanism. All right, so bringing everything home. What we just looked at is really what we consider to be the path to modern benefits. So improving your benefits starts with understanding the supply chain, making sure you have the right vendor partners. And as you can kind of see here in this graphic, starting on the left with fully insured all the way to the right with captive, the further along you go down the spectrum of managing your health plan expenses, you're going to gain a greater ability to control your plan design. So you can implement things like disappearing deductibles, no cost for labs, imaging, surgical procedures. You're going to have a greater ability to implement cost controls, whether it be carve-outs or direct contracts. And then ultimately, all of this is working towards lowering your premium spend. So you don't have to get there all at once, guys, right? You can take small steps and you can move there very systematically. The further you move along the spectrum, the more knowledge you'll gain, the more confident you can feel. So when it comes to choosing your purchasing strategy, at the end of the day, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Some larger companies aren't ever going to self-fund. Some smaller companies already are self-funding. The benefit purchasing and insurance expense management requires a cohesive team to sort through these solutions. And we're talking, you want to have your HR director on board, you want to have your CFO involved, sometimes your CEO involved, because what we're really talking about here are creative expense management strategies designed to help your business effectively manage this expense while giving your employees the benefits that they want and they need. A consultant's job is to facilitate you and your team to the best possible outcome out of these strategies. The case for change is simple. If you look at the diffusion of innovation curve, which we've all probably seen, right? We know that early on you have those innovators that take up the new case for change, and then you have your early adopters that come shortly after the innovators, And then you cross the chasm where you start to have the majority on board. Well, as we saw earlier, we have the majority on board with level funding or self-funding. So it's all about identifying which strategy is going to work best for you, which strategy is going to work best for your company. If you fall into the 46% of construction or manufacturing businesses that struggle to understand how to maximize your health plan purchasing strategy, you could be paying too much for a plan that has not been optimized to your workforce. As you can see, each health plan risk financing strategy has its own strengths and weaknesses. The key is to find a strategy that aligns with your company's goals, risk tolerance, and your employees' needs. If you'd like to explore how these plans work further, I'd love to help. Schedule a quick 15 to 30 minute call with me to learn how we can help your business tailor these strategies to fit your needs.